Well, back to Straight Shooting News 2-year anniversary show. This will be episode 12 of The Awakening, the BRICS Deception. Will former constitutional freedom survive the onslaught of authoritarian nationalism? I said, I'm your host, Ben Banner. Now, in part 3, we ended with a clip from the Taiwanese president receiving an award from the Hudson Institute. Now, what we're going to do in part 4 is, like we told you, at the end of part 3, we're going to give you some extra from the Hudson Institute think tank. Now, keep in mind, the Hudson Institute think tank was banned in China. They do not like the facts and the truth coming out. So, with that being said, this piece is going to be about the Communist China's strategy based on the paranoia of coexisting. So listen closely, because this will put our first 3 parts into perspective.
China is our greatest foreign threat, and it's time we begin to act accordingly.
Had a front-page story titled China Auditions for Lead Global Role. The article describes China's new assertiveness on the world stage and suggests that its original strategy of biding its time while building its strength was overtaken by its need for resources and by its growing economic and political interests around the world. With regard to Latin America and other developing countries, the article says President Xi wants China to serve as a benign power and a counterweight to a bullying United States. Miles, I would like to get your perspective on this. Is the idea of China as a benign counterweight to the United States a useful way to think about how China sees the world? How does Latin America fit into China's larger strategy?
Thank you, Dan, and I'm glad that welcome to Hudson, and China Center is honored to host this event. To answer the question, well, China's Latin American strategy is actually part of China's global strategy. And then the question is, what is China's global strategy? Well, China's global strategy is related to China's global paranoia. So when I say paranoia, is not just in the sense of psychological and mental. It's pretty much like ideological, because according to orthodox Marxist-Leninism, socialist country like China is naturally, inevitably the arch enemy of the international capitalism, and only socialist country in the world that has the capability to triumph is China. So China has this kind of self-awareness that it is the only correct socialist country that is besieged by international hostile forces led by the United States. Therefore, they believe that China is in the middle of the being contained and the target of a peaceful evolution or color revolution, and also regime change. So this is what China's strategic paranoia is all about. As such, to maintain regime stability and survival, therefore, is the primal motive of many of China's international stands. This is a very important part of China's global strategy. To do that, you would have to do pretty much like 2 things. One is you have to create a global economic and technological dependency on China. That's China's primary modus operandi these days. 2 is to figure out a series of global counterstrike at the West in general and the United States in particular. We have seen this in the last couple of days when Xi Jinping visited Moscow and came out with a pretty strong statement to pretty much like illustrate that kind of strategy. So let me just talk about the agenda number 1, to create global economic and technological dependency on China. That's where Latin America played a very crucial role, because Latin America is one of the primary area for China's strategy in this regard. That is, Latin America provides very rich resource extraction. China's engagement in this aspect is pretty robust, I'm sure. All the panelists in this section will provide more insights on this. Secondly, China's approach to Latin America in this regard would be a massive capital investment. The purpose of that is basically to replace the role of the West-dominated financial institutions such as the World Bank and Inter-American Development Bank and even IMF. So that's why China wants to play a very dominant role.
Let's take that apart for you. But remember what we said about the Monroe Doctrine, the Roosevelt Corollary, and the Taft dollar diplomacy. But let's see what he said. He said that Communist China is the arch enemy of capitalism. He's correct. We've told you before, there's no coexisting between communism and freedom. They're attacking the Western Hemisphere. Communist China and BRICS, they claim, is the alternative to the bullying of the U.S. in Latin America, when it's the exact opposite. China is using U.S. history and strategies against us. They want to dominate the Western Hemisphere. What Miles, politely called socialism, is actually called hard communism. And he is correct. Or like I said, the arch enemy part. But has there ever been a peaceful communist revolution? The answer is no. As all communist countries collapsed under its own burden. Yes. Explained how Reagan took the Soviet Union out when he discovered how much the Soviet Union was invested in Western capitalism to keep their communist regime going and their people fed and from revolting against their government. The Chinese don't care. They have a record of this. They will murder and slaughter their own people to retain power. Now, in saying that, imagine what they will do to the people in the Western Hemisphere, to the people in the U.S., if we ever give them control. So, what do you say? Resource extraction. China's need for commodities like fossil fuel, energy, and minerals is behind their actions. And to isolate the U.S. from them at the same time. It's a two-pronged plan. We can have no dependency on China, which is why Trump was ending that. And he threw the tariffs on to rebuild the U.S. manufacturing base and economy. Biden is doing the exact opposite. Now, fact is right now, Xi Jinping and Tony Putin in Russia are acting on his behalf. At the same time, they're funding a proxy war in the West by provoking Putin and Russia with funding in exchange for what's been the main theme of the whole series. It's been exchange for oil and gas. The U.S. petrodollar and the Communist China is using their money while at the same time supporting Putin to build up their war machine to strike the U.S. forces. And they're going to do this. They need to strike us, they will. What was Roosevelt's corollary all about? What was Monroe's doctrine all about? It was peace through strength, which means we have an agenda, or say, doctrine or corollary, backed by military power. So, Communist China is well aware. They already have placed the U.S. in a compromised position, dating back to NAFTA in GATT, the organization, the trade acts. That's what Ross Perot was trying to warn us about. He called everything out that's taking place today. And let's not be naive here. The war in Ukraine was coordinated with the Chinese before it even started. And here we are again. The mainstream media is doing their part as toadies, and they've done throughout history to bring us to this dire point. Now, we're in a part of human history now, which could well play out as a nuclear war, as former President Trump knows. The last 2 points before we continue. At one time, not so long ago, I could refer to forces to oppose communist Chinese tyrannical power in an attempt to take over as allied forces. But as we see from a recent trip to China by French President Macron, the use of social media blitz being used as we exposed with clip from the two self-proclaimed doctors that no concept of what it is like to live under communism control is even in these people's minds. It's going to be left up to freedom-loving Americans and friendly forces in our allied countries to do the heavy lifting to stop this. So let's hear more from Miles Yu.
I think China wants to develop to basically enhance infrastructure development, to create regional links among all the countries, with China being the major sort of pusher for this. So this is basically the economic and technological dependency part. Second part, China's Latin America in China's global strategy is a very important part of the global counter-strike at the West and at the United States. I'm going to basically just briefly mention some of the things. China basically want to use Latin America to mitigate and diminish America's influence in the region. I mentioned about the capital investment to replace the international institutions. That's one of them. Another thing is to develop the China-controlled regional alliance and integration plans. China, for example, has been instrumental in creating this the Community of Latin American and the Caribbean States, CELAC, and subsequently the China CELAC Forum. So those were designed to create China's regional influence. And then the next thing will be Latin America play a very important role in China's political and propaganda warfare as a part of the global strategy. So, for example, China has been supportive of all the anti-U.S. rogue countries, especially Cuba, Venezuela, and Latin America became a major venue for China to hyperventilate anti-American sentiment. If you recall, during the height of the 2001 crisis of the EP3 incident, when the United States president tried to communicate with the Chinese Secretary General Jiang Zemin, he refused to pick up the phone. Instead, where did he go? He flew to Cuba, and where he recited Chairman Mao's quotations and vented his anti-American sentiment over there. And the Chavez Maduro regime in Venezuela also has become a primary venue for China to hyperventilate its propaganda against the United States. Also, you should recall Xi Jinping's most explicit anti-American remarks were made when he was visiting Mexico. So this was a very important part of the Chinese global propaganda and political affair agenda. And when the Chinese Navy wants to enhance its soft power, it sends its hospital ships to the Caribbean first. And also it's trying to sort of bring Brazil into this China-dominated regional alliance of BRICS. And so Brazil plays a very important role in this Chinese strategic maneuver, such as this. And I will also say Latin America also is playing an increasingly important role in Chinese global agenda in the arena of military, security, intelligence, and law enforcement, because China is developing very robust anti-US agenda in those areas. Let's talk about the military. Military engagement in Latin America, China primarily dealing with countries like Venezuela. China has exported fighter jets and missiles to Venezuela, to Chavez and Maduro regime. And China also has had a pretty robust military training and joint exercise programs with the Venezuelan military. China also has increased its weapon sales to a number of very important Latin American countries like Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Peru. So you can see there is that area. Now, on security and intelligence, China also increases efforts to control choke points, such as the Panama Canal, and I'm sure the panelists would have more insight on that. China also is trying to develop a plan B in case Panama Canal could not be controlled. So they are very intense in terms of working on countries like Nicaragua and Guatemala, where an alternative isthmus canal could possibly be dug out.
There's a lot that Miles just told us. He turned around, he verified when we heard some other videos. He verified previous 3 segments. He's verifying all the propaganda that's being spread on social media on how BRICS is going to be the great alternative to the hegemony of the U.S. Well, basically, this is a counter-strike on the U.S. and the free world. It's a soft power supported through financing and military power. Sounds like talk softly and carry a big stick, President Roosevelt. Now, China going to control the regional alliance against America through South America. He mentioned Cuba, Venezuela, and a number of other South American states. That's where they're going after Mexico right now. And he's right about the strategic choke points. If you look at it, the Panama Canal. So what happens? Do we have a plan B if the canal cannot be accessed and is under China control? I watched Senator Bob Smith from New Hampshire make that point on the Senate floor in the 1990s. Once again, it's history. This sounds exactly like a plan for war. And only those who are in denial or siding with the tyrannical communist regime is going to tell you differently. Keep in mind what happened in Brazil with Bolsonaro. If anybody's unfamiliar, I'll put it to you this way. Bolsonaro lost the election in Brazil by a small margin of votes. Sound familiar to what happened in 2020 here? But what they did in Brazil is they disqualified a region with a whole number of votes, enough votes that would have made Bolsonaro the victim. Him and Trump were too close. It was in the way of their agenda. But let's hear a little more from Miles on Taiwan surveillance and money laundering. Hold on.
So that is there. And China also conduct intense security intelligence operations in countries that recognize Taiwan, in Central American countries. And they have done a number of pretty successful operations there. Overall, though, Chinese intelligence operations in Latin America focuses on gathering economic and trade secrets related to U.S. technological and regional trade issues in this area. Now, on law enforcement, which actually is very important because law enforcement issue has been, in some sense, the focal point of the U.S. relationship with Latin American countries, particularly with Mexico and some Central American countries. This has basically several elements of that. One is China has been pretty active in offshore money laundering, using the Latin American country, particularly some of the Caribbean countries, as a safe haven for its illicit assets, some of them actually state-run operations, to evade international monetary regulation and monitoring. And now, obviously, on everybody's mind in the United States is China's involvement in America's drug infestation, and particularly the fentanyl export from Mexico to the United States. China played a very important role in supplying critical components of the fentanyl manufacturing in Mexico, and also some might say, there's a lot of reports about China's role in providing drug cartel financing. And that's one aspect of the law enforcement issues that it's sort of part of the Chinese global strategy. Recently, though, because our southern border has been pretty porous, so there have been a large number of illegal border crossing by Chinese nationals, and some of them American intelligence community believes are highly suspicious of being Chinese state sponsored by the Chinese states for a number of malign purposes. So overall, Latin America and China's global strategy is to create economic and financial technological dominance through massive capital investment, infrastructure building, regional integration, and a political coalition. Secondly, is to use Latin America as a platform to uproot the US as the leading rival of the CCP regime and part of the CCP's global strategy for regime survival and socialist triumph. So that's pretty like a broad picture, and I am going to stop here and looking forward to hear more of the expert insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Miles. You covered a lot of ground there.
We did cover a lot of ground now. He covered some serious ground. He verified everything we've been concerned about. See, the Communist Chinese are no better than the capitalists when it comes to laundering their money. That's why we told you need to go back and watch our shows on the Pandora Files. Because again, why was this major news story that broke at the end of 2019? Every reporter in the world was hot and heavy to get all over to expose all this corruption, drug cartels, all the political leaders across the world that they had already identified. It went silent. Don't understand that connection. Spying and trade secrets, spying on the military. Well, that's something that just came up. Hasn't it? Oh, southern border, supplying fentanyl as ingredients to the Mexican cartels. Well, they're claiming that the Mexican cartels control probably, close to 70% of Mexico? The Mexican president, he's compromised. When Trump was there, Trump claims they got along great. He knew he was a socialist, but I think he respected Trump. He wouldn't dare try to pull what he's doing now. So we got 90 Chinese nationals crossing our borders. Many of them are sent over here, and the word is now they've been sent here and they're in debt to the Chinese mafia. And just recently, they've expelled Chinese elites from our country. What was the protest in Taiwan against that we showed you? They were protesting against the Taiwanese president coming. Who were those people? That was the question we asked you in an episode. Okay, why? Here's the bigger question. Why would any presidential administration allow this to happen if it wasn't compromised or even true communists at heart. But in their narcissistic minds, they truly believe that they and they alone knows what is best for the overall human race. Like we said, the U.S. happens to be the leader of the free world. Militarily, half a dollar is a trading currency, and they're coming after it all. They're seeing it crumble. So what is standing in the complete way, complete control of the U.S. Constitution and the U.S. Bill of Rights? That's the answer to that question, because these are inalienable rights granted to us by our Creator, which is why these are godless creatures prowling over here and slithering over here from communist China. There's no coexisting with them. At one time, you thought you could try, but I think we're now at the point where we have to accept the fact that there's no coexisting. Because, as Miles said, and we've read at the beginning, they are paranoid. They're too paranoid to coexist with anybody else. They will smile at them. They will use them. They will use them as toadies, just like they're doing to the people in South America, which is probably why so many are running up here. If things are so great in Venezuela, the other South American countries, these people would be rushing to the U.S. border. When you hear somebody say, well, we don't want law, no one wants law. But unless we implement things like the Monroe Doctrine, the Roosevelt Corollary, and then maybe back it up with the Taft-All diplomacy and send it to our allies like the Chinese are doing with the BRICS, their strategy is going to work. Well, we're going to show you some of the repeated propaganda lies coming from the toadies of this Far Eastern culture. That we'll see in part 5.